With everything that's been happening, the flow of shocking events and the accompanying reports and commentaries and expressions of alarm, it can be quite challenging to focus and make any sort of objective analysis. I mean, the assassination of Hania, the Israeli terrorist attacks in Lebanon with the pagers and so on, the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, the airstrikes on Beirut, and of course the ongoing attacks in Gaza, and all the tension around the possibility of war with Iran. It's all created a kind of sonic cacophony that paralyzes the ability to concentrate. But let me take the approach that I've always advocated. Begin from the inevitable point in the future when Islam and the Muslim world will hold collective superpower status, and then contextualize current events as being events in our history that contributed to that eventuality. Project your mind into the future and look at today as if in retrospect. Analyze the present from a future historical perspective. So, okay, in the future, we will see stability and prosperity in Bilad al-Sham. There will be development from Gaza to Antalya. The region will be integrated, cohesive, and peaceful, with a robust economy, an Arab-Muslim majority with the Jewish minority. There will likely be so-called nation-states that will still continue, but there will be a kind of collective sovereignty with economic and political authority, most likely centered in both Saudi and in Turkey. Zionism will be a bad memory, which the Jews in the region will have long disavowed and repented from, much like the Germans today try hard to distance themselves from Nazism. We will look back on this period that we're in now as the watershed moment when the tides irreversibly turned and the ascendancy of our ummah began. Wallahi. So look at it from this perspective, from the perspective of a future historian. They will dissect how every move that the Zionists and the Americans are making now brought about the end of their influence and ushered in a new era of Muslim regional supremacy. Mark my words. For example, looking at today, like a historian, you might say, America and their Zionist colonies seemed to believe in the mid-2020s that violence was a magical formula that had no downside. However, Israel's unhinged attacks against their enemies depleted not only their own reputation internationally, their own military capabilities, their own economy, the security of their own citizens who are increasingly opting to leave Israel amidst the conflict. It also depleted their own historical rationale for their aggression and violence. The entire Arab world expressed in the 2020s their willingness to reach a peaceful settlement with the Israelis, decisively exposing to the world that the Israelis and the Americans were exclusively responsible for the perpetuation of the conflict in the Middle East. And still speaking as a future historian, militant factions like Hamas and Hezbollah were weakened and then were eventually discarded by their sponsors, because it's quite clear that Iran has already started moving away from Hezbollah, turning away from Hezbollah, potentially even sabotaging Hezbollah. And when Iran eventually joined the BRICS-led initiative to negotiate with Israel, taking the same position as Saudi Arabia, that their own normalization with Israel was available to Israel if they would just comply with the global consensus on the establishment of a Palestinian state. And yes, I believe that all of these things will happen, probably sooner than most people think. So all of these actions, again, speaking as a future historian, all of these actions that the Arabs and the Muslims took in the 2020s, 2030s, and so on, left Israel with no excuse, and they took the lead as the only true peacemakers in the region. The devastation that Israel caused in Gaza and caused in Lebanon also crippled the Israeli economy itself. And that paved the way for GCC and BRICS investment all along the Mediterranean coastline, bringing that entire swath of land under their sphere of economic influence and control. As Israel's savagery increasingly became known to people across the West, anti-Semitism also increased, with America and Europe wanting then to distance themselves from their own complicity in Israel's crimes, eventually leading them to abandon the Zionists and abandon Zionism. Though, of course, they only did that for the sake of salvaging their own appearance of moral innocence. But all of this left Israel weak and optionless, and they were forced to agree to negotiate under the auspices of an international peace initiative led by BRICS, along the lines of the Arab Peace Plan. Negotiations then proceeded for some period of time within the framework of the two-state solution. But gradually it became clear that the only feasible long-term plan was the one-state solution, with all Palestinian territory being integrated into Israel, so-called Israel at that time, and all Palestinian inhabitants of that territory being granted full citizenship with equal rights, and the ultimate disavowal of the racist concept of the country being a Jewish state. Now, throughout this process, fanatical Zionists who opposed peace and opposed a rational, fair, and equitable solution, well, they voluntarily left Israel and went back to their historical homelands in the West, which only further facilitated reaching a settlement because of the removal of those radical elements from the society and from the electorate. Israel's tech sector, which is the only significant sector that they have in their economy really, was transferred. They transferred their allegiance from the US to China and to the GCC, and they became a research and development hub for BRICS, for the BRICS nations, for the BRICS economies. Eventually, there was a Palestinian prime minister of what was still known as Israel in 2024, but which was renamed Palestine once the one-state solution was formalized. And the whole region, from Syria to Sinai, was developed by GCC investment and BRICS investment, with America largely sidelined and isolated, creating a dynamic, economically vibrant, stable, and peaceful region, which functioned essentially as the center of the global economy, where Arabs, Jews, Muslims, and Christians all coexist and all prosper together. This is the history that I see playing out ahead of us. If you look at Israel's actions now, and because of those actions now, you think that this vision is unrealistic or idealistic, then you are simply not looking far enough ahead. And you're just reacting emotionally to their brutal actions without foresight, without looking into what the eventual results of these actions will be. And maybe that's because you yourself have adopted the short-term Western mentality, but we're Muslims. We operate on or should operate, and should understand things according to a much longer timeline, a much bigger time frame. Where Westerners use a clock, we use a calendar. Or maybe you yourself are too propagandized by Western Zionist media and by Muslim Brotherhood rhetoric or what have you. So you're actually invested in the idea that Israel and America are unstoppable and that the Arabs are all puppets. Whatever the case may be, if you do not see how everything happening today constitutes the downfall of Israel and the downfall of America playing out in real time, then you're blind, either by emotion or by indoctrination. The way empires rise is also the way they fall. America rose by colonial settler violence and expansion, and Israel is just a microcosm of that. They rose by belligerence and brutality and genocide, and this is exactly what's bringing them down now. Yes, it is violent. Yes, it is savage. Yes, it is criminal and horrific, and it's incredibly painful. But it's like water draining out from a pool. It moves faster and more violently at the bottom of the vortex until it disappears. What we're seeing now, in my opinion, is the dying spiral of American empire, and Israel is the drain that it's going down.